Hello, welcome back. My name is Kimberly Carey. I'm the owner of So Sassy Stitcher here in Northwest Arkansas. I am working on Mountain Meadow today. I am working on Black 5. So I'm going to go through, I had a lot of changes on this one. So I'm just going to go through all those with you and then walk you through some of the blocks, especially the cat's cradle, which is a little bit different this time around. So the cutting directions are significantly changed for how I wanted to do them. Okay, so I'm going to go through those with you. Fabric 1, I'm going to do a 4.5-inch strip. I had a leftover 4.5-inch strip, so I was able to use that. That is going to be for our quarter square triangles, and so you're going to need to do it this method, you're going to need a quarter square triangle ruler. You can on that one cut squares, cut them twice diagonally like the instructions say. I'm going to zoom this in here for you. You can do it that way. I do recommend oversizing just a touch. But I use the 4.5-inch strip and cut the two triangles that way. And part of the reason for that is because if you do this size of square and cut it twice, you're going to have two triangles left over. So I'm trying to be frugal with my fabric, and so I didn't want to do it that way. All right, fabric 5. This is where the cat's cradle comes in. If you don't have a cat's cradle ruler from Creative Grids, this is what it looks like. Move this so that maybe you can see it a little bit better. Okay. There you go. This is a cat's cradle ruler from Creative Grids. And if you need the instructions, there's a QR code right there that you can go and grab the instructions, download those. So doing it this way, I don't have to cut any triangles, which means that I don't have to have any biases, which is nice. But I'm changing up my directions a little bit. So this is how I changed them up. Fabric 5, I have two 2 3/4 by 3 3/4 rectangles, and I am not cutting them. Okay, I'm leaving all of these square. Then I'm going to have a 7-inch square that is for my flying geese. Okay, I always abbreviate that FG. And then I need my 3 by 3 squares for the border. Those are the same. Stay exactly what they are. Fabric 6. Again, this is for cat's cradle. I'm going to change that. Instead of 4 7/8 squares, I'm going to cut two 5 by 6 rectangles, not cutting them. I'm going to have that 4.5-inch square, which is the same because it's the center of the big block. Then the second one that I need for the cat's cradle is this 3.5 by 4.5 rectangle. The 3 by 3 square can stay. And then instead of the 1 3/4-inch squares, I'm going to do 1 6-inch square. And again, this is for my flying geese. Fabric 8, I need two 5-inch squares. This is for the half square triangle. And I'm doing this one for these blocks. And you know what? I do need to double that because I'm making 8 of those. So I'm going to have to cut a few more of those, which is slightly unfortunate because fabric 8 is the one fabric that I am running low on. So I'm going to have to cut some more of those. And then the 4.5-inch fabrics can stay. Fabric 10, I'm bumping those up to 5-inch as well for the half square triangles. I did cut that many of those. I don't know why I thought I needed fewer of those fabric 8, but you know, we all make mistakes. We're human, right? All right, fabric 11, I'm going to do a 4.5-inch strip. Again, that's going to be for my half square triangle. You don't need a full strip. A third of a strip really works, or a half strip. So if you have just a little bit, you can make that work. All right, fabric 13, again, a 4.5-inch strip for those half square triangles. And then this is my cat's cradle. It is going to be a 2 by 3-inch rectangle. And then I need 1 6-inch square for the flying geese. Fabric 15 can stay the same. It's just for the spacer. Fabric 16, this is for the half square triangle. I just bumped this up 1/8 of an inch to 3.5. I hate cutting 8s, and it gives me a little bit extra to square that guy up because things get wonky. And if you don't have that perfect scant 1/4 inch, then this is a real easy way to make sure that you're not short on that half square triangle. Fabric 17, I'm going to cut a 4.5-inch strip for that 1/4 square triangle. Then I'm going to cut 2 5.5-inch squares, and this is going to be for flying geese. And then for the cat's cradle, I am going to cut a 2 3/4 by 3 and no, never mind. I'm second guessing myself. I'm going to cut 2 3/4 inch squares, and I need 4 of them for those cat's cradle. That's going to be the square in our cat's cradle. And then the border 3 by 3 squares I'm keeping. Fabric 21, there is no change there. Fabric 22, I am going to cut 3.5-inch squares, again for those half square triangles. The 3 by 3 squares stay. Instead of the 1 3/4 by 3-inch rectangles, which are for flying geese, I'm going to cut 2 4.5-inch squares for my flying geese. And then instead of 1 3/4-inch squares, I'm going to do 2-inch squares. And again, that's for the cat's cradle. Fabric 23 stays the same. Fabric 24, the 3 by 3 squares, you're going to have a total of 11. 4 of them are going to be for block 5B. 7 of them are going to be border, but you need a total of 11 3 by 3 squares. Then I'm going to cut 1 7-inch square for my flying geese. Fabric 25 stays the same. So again, a lot of different cutting instructions. All right, so in addition to your regular cutting ruler to cut all of these blocks out, you are going to need your 1/4 square triangle ruler. You are going to want a cat's cradle if you can get one. It does make these finish up really nice. I need flying geese. I need my 2 by 4 flying geese, and I need my 1.5 by 3 flying geese, even though we're going to make them a touch smaller than that. And then I also have a triangle square up ruler. I also used my shape cut for some of these. So a lot of different rulers for this one, but that's okay. All right. Now, 1/4 square triangle for our spacer. These are pretty easy. So you can see I have my triangles here. These are what I use the 1/4 square triangle for. So I just look at what size I need it finished, which is going to be 8 inches. So I need a 4.5-inch strip. Then you just sew these together, and then you're going to iron them open to the same direction so that when I put them together, they're going to be opposite like that. So I will just iron those together, and I have these here. So it's going to go together just like this. And because I ironed my seams towards the green on this one, then I get these nice little nesting seams. It alleviates the bulk, which is nice, and they just sit in there nice and tight. And then you don't really even hardly, you can throw a pin in there if you want to, but I don't even have to because those are just going to sit real nicely in there. And then I'm just going to stitch along there. Easy peasy for those. Those will go with our spacers. Okay, next we have our half square triangles. So the way that they want you to do the half square triangles is you cut this square and then you cut it in half and sew them together. I'm just waiting to cut those apart until I have them stitched together. So I use this little guy just to lay down the diagonal of my blocks that are right sides together. I make a mark on either side. Okay, you can use pen, pencil, you can use chalk pencil, you can use a heat erasing pencil, doesn't really matter. And then I'm just gonna stitch down those lines. Then I'm gonna take my ruler and I'm just gonna cut along that diagonal. Now, before I open these up, what I'm gonna do is I'm going to take my squared up ruler, and these are the ones that need to finish 3 inches. So on this ruler, I have whole numbers on this side and I have half numbers on this side. So on this one, I am just going to put that 3 right on that stitch line. And you can see I don't have much left to trim off, right? That's the extent of what I had to trim off, okay? But then I have this perfect 3-inch square when I am finished, okay? And again, I'm gonna iron those open. And you can see once I've trimmed them up, then they are perfect, non-wonky half square triangles, which is nice because I hate wonky blocks. If I can help it, I end up with them, but if I can help them, I'm gonna do something to avoid them. Okay, cat's cradle. This one's a little bit different. We haven't walked through this one at all. So for my cat's cradle, I am going to take my square. So on my cat's cradle block, depending on the size is going to be dependent on what sizes you do. So on the block or on the ruler, it shows I want what size finished block and then what size to cut each of my, I have two squares, 2 rectangles that go beside it, and then 1 bigger rectangle. Okay, so you're just going to look at that depending on the size. I've given you the sizes for this one. So I'm going to take my square and my smaller rectangle and I'm going to sew those together. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to flop them around like this and I'm going to stitch those together. So then I end up with this. Okay, so then I am going to take my larger rectangle and this guy's going to go right on top like this. Okay. And now what I'm going to do, so this is a lot like the flying geese that I do the Eleanor Burns method. So now I'm going to mark this guy. I have to remind myself how I do this because it is a little bit, there we go. Okay. So we have this mark sewing line. That would help if I paid attention to that. Okay, this is where I'm going to mark. And what I want to do is these dark lines right here are going to go along the seam line of my square. So I have ironed everything towards the rectangles. And just like in my flying geese, when I take that little snip out of the center between the 2 sides, I've done that on this cat's cradle as well. So now I'm going to take my marking pen and I'm going to mark along this line. Couple of key things for you. Once this is done, we're still going to trim it up so you don't have to worry if it is exact on these corners. Okay. This is actually the largest size that this particular block does. It only goes to a 4-inch finished. We want these 4.5, so that is a 4-inch finished. So that's perfect for this. The biggest thing that you want to make sure of is that your line, your stitching line, does not cross this intersection right here. It needs to be on this side, because if it's on this side or even right on that mark, I needed a scant thread over so that I'm not cutting off that point of the square. Okay, so I'm going to make a mark. Like so. Okay, I'm going to flip this guy around and I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Just like so. Okay, then just like our flying geese, I'm going to stitch along these lines. You can see that it doesn't come to this corner right here or right here. That is okay. We're going to trim these up. Okay, so I'm going to stitch along those lines. So this one you can see I have stitched along those lines. I have just a scant thread width on this side of my square so that I don't cut that corner off of my square. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to cut these apart, and I'm going to cut a 1/4 inch from my stitch line. So you can see this one has a 1/4 inch, this one does not. This one's a little wide. So I'm going to take and I'm going to trim this up to a 1/4 inch. You wouldn't have to do this step, but it alleviates some of the bulk in your quilt by having a smaller seam line. So there's not a whole lot there. That's okay. Now I can open these up and I am going to iron towards the bigger triangle. Okay, and you can see my point is still intact here. Okay, so then I have this. Okay, this one is still too big, so I'm going to take my cat's cradle again, and I'm going to use the trim side, and I am going to place it. So these are 3-inch blocks. Okay, so it's 2.5 inch finished block. So you can see that I have this 2.5 inch right here. So this 2.5 inch line is on my square, and then the broken diagonal line is going to go across my seam. Okay, so all of that should line up. It may not be exactly perfect, but it should be close. Okay, so you can see I have quite a bit I'm going to trim up, not quite a 1/4 inch, but close. So I am going to go just like that. And then I can turn it around and I can still use, you can either swap to another ruler if you want to, or I can just make sure that that line is along my seam again, and then this dotted line is going to go right down my point, and then that should ensure me a 3-inch block. Okay, and there I have a 3-inch finished block just like that. You can see on this one I didn't quite get my stitching over enough, and I cut that corner off just a little bit. Not going to change it. It is what it is. And I'm just going to leave that. But now I have my nice finished cat's cradle. This one I did a little bit better. I didn't cut as much off of that one block. So that's how you use cat's cradle. Again, you can QR code it and get those instructions. Okay. Last but not least is our flying geese. And I know I have walked you through these before, but it can take some time to get the hang of. So I'm going to walk it through quickly again, and then I'm going to show you how to trim up those little guys. So I have my big fabric square on the bottom and then my smaller one on top so that it frames it nicely. Again, I'm using this guy to mark either side of that diagonal line, and I stitch down it. I'm going to iron this, and then once it's ironed, this gets cut apart just like that. And then I'm going to iron towards the large rectangle. Okay. So then once I have these ironed towards the large rectangle, they get flip-flopped around, okay, so that they sit on top of each other just like this. You're going to have these little ears hanging out, okay? Again, I'm going perpendicular to the stitches that I already made. I'm going to use my little guy to make that line. I'm going to stitch either side of those, and then I'm going to cut down the center of this. Again, with these and the cat's cradle, I'm going to split the difference between these two seams here, and I'm going to just do a little snip to the stitching line. I'm not going to cut through that stitching line. I just want to cut to it so that I can iron so that these are, my triangles are open for the center of my flying geese. And that's why we do that little snip. Okay, so then I have them, I iron those guys open, and now I have this. So these are the smaller ones. They finish 2 3/4. No. What do they finish at? I gotta look again because it's an odd size. It is going to finish 1 3/4 by 3. Okay, is what we want them cut size to, so that they actually finish 1 1/4 by 2 1/2. Okay, so the smallest flying geese ruler I have is a 1 1/2 by 3. So that's what I cut all my pieces to. And then I'm just trimming them down. So I'm going to take my 1 1/2 by 3, and I'm going to cut these guys apart. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and trim up 3 of my sides. I'm not going to bother with the bottom at this moment in time. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take a regular ruler. You can do a smaller ruler than this. And I'm going to cut that bottom. And the way that I'm going to do that is I am going to use my, I'm going to put 1 3/4 along my top edge. Okay, so this is how much I have to trim off. My 45 degree is along this seam line here. So then it helps me know how much I can cut off on this side. And then I'm just going to flip this guy around, and then I'm going to make it 1 3/4 by 3. Just like that. Okay, and then I have a nice little flying geese. I do end up cutting up a little bit more off of these only because I had to oversize them because I don't have a ruler small enough for those. But that's okay. Yes, I'm wasting a little bit, but I would rather do that and get them right than do the traditional method and have them be wonky. So I hope this helps. Watch it multiple times if you need to for that cat's cradle. It can be confusing a little bit if you've never done that one before, but it really does work well for getting them nice and square. Hope this helps you continue on your journey through Mountain Meadow. Have a fantastic day and happy quilting.